recognizes no religion and supports atheistic propaganda in order to implant a scientific, materialistic world outlook in people.
What do you think you're saying? I mean, that's an appalling thing to say. Of course it is.
Why is that an appalling thing to say? What do you disagree with in that statement?
Why would I want to support atheistic propaganda? I support science and truth.
But you don't support spreading atheism.
I support spreading science and truth. If that happens to be atheism, I support it. I'm not going to start bullying people into being atheist. I'm not going to start trying to compel people to be atheists. That was what the Albanians were doing. It's nothing to do with what...
Before we go any further, I just want to check something. Are you an atheist?
For all practical purposes, yes. Nobody can actually say for certain that anything doesn't exist. But I'm an atheist in the same way as I'm an a-leprechaunist and an a-fairyist and an a-pink unicornist.
So you're not 100% sure God doesn't exist, but you're sure enough to make it practically...
I'm as sure as you are sure that fairies and leprechauns don't exist.
And do you see an equivalence between the idea of God and the idea of a fairy and a leprechaun?
The evidence for both is equally poor.
You say, in The God Delusion, one of my favorite sentences that jumps out of the page, that the God of the Old Testament is a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capricious, malevolent bully. As a piece of rhetoric, superb. But do you really believe that?
Congratulations on getting megalomaniacal right, by the way. Most people fumble on that. Yes, if you've actually read the Old Testament, I think you would have to agree. It's hideous. It's an the God of the Old Testament who is a monster.
But also the God of the Quran, the New Testament, the Hindu scripture?
Well, the God of the Quran, I don't know so much about. The God of the New Testament is widely advertised as being a bit more gentle. And certainly, on the whole, he is. There are things about the New Testament that I find, in a way, almost more objectionable than the Old Testament. But the sheer horror of the character, I said he was the most unpleasant character in all fiction, because I regard it as fiction, of course. And yes, he is. I mean, he's jealous, he's vindictive, he's callous, he's cruel.
And yet this is a God that is worshipped by, loved by, adored by, followed by millions, billions of people.
I hope not. I hope that the God that is adored by millions of people is a grown-up kind of God who is no longer... I hope that most people the kind of people I would like to know who worship and admire him, regard those stories as not literally true. Now, there are some who do regard them as literally true, and I suspect they either haven't read the Old Testament or they're not the kind of people I would wish to know, because you do not want to worship a character like that. By all means, worship some kind of great spirit of the universe, some kind of creative intelligence who created the universe, but don't worship this vile, vindictive monster of the Old Testament.
So why throw around these sweeping statements about religion? Not the God of the Old Testament, but religion itself being evil. I mean, do you believe religion is evil?
No.
But you say plenty of times in this book that religion is evil. You said in a speech famously that I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate.
I do think that, yes. Because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now, that is evil.
And yet you spend so much of your time debating people of faith. So clearly people of faith are interested in having discussions. They're not just all blind believers insisting on their way of...
Well, nobody said anything about all of them. I mean, the vast majority of religious people are perfectly good, nice people, as you are. There's no suggestion I've ever made that all religious people are evil. Of course not. There is a logical progression that goes from believing in faith having faith that your God tells you to do something, and doing terrible deeds, like suicide bombing, like flying planes into skyscrapers. The vast majority of people of faith don't do such terrible things. But those people who do terrible things do it believing that they are righteous and good, and they think that they're doing the will of their God. So they're not evil people, they're actually good people by their own lights. They believe they're doing good things, and that's why religion is evil, because it can make you do evil things believing that they are good.
Do you really believe that people who go out and carry out suicide bombings, it is faith? Religion is to blame, not geopolitics, not the world, not their lives, not what's going on around us. It's religion, plain and simple.
Not always, it's not in the case of the Tamil Tigers, for example, but I think in a great majority of cases it is, and I think it certainly makes it a hell of a lot easier. The evidence is plain that in many Islamic suicide bombers, you talk to them, those who fail, you talk to them afterwards, they've got paradise on the brain. They're desperate to go to a martyr's heaven. And that's what they think about.
When we look at the Old Testament, Dawkins is correct that it portrays a violent and vindictive deity. In Deuteronomy 20:16-17, God commands the Israelites to wipe out entire nations. You shall not leave alive anything that breathes. In 1 Samuel 15:3, God tells Saul to kill men, women, children, and infants. These are not metaphors. They are written as divine orders. Historians like Hector Avalos and Bart Ehrman note these passages reflect ancient tribal conquest, not divine morality. If any human leader gave those commands today, we'd call it genocide. The same is true in Islam. The Quran promises paradise to martyrs, Surah 3:157-158, Surah 9:111, which has been directly cited by suicide bombers in their own writings. This isn't speculation. After the London bombings of 2005, investigators found martyrdom letters explicitly referring to Quranic verses. Religion provides the framework where killing innocents can be reframed as holy duty, and Dawkins' point about faith being dangerous lines up with psychology. Studies show that when beliefs are held without evidence and reinforced by group identity, they become immune to rational challenge. That's why otherwise decent people can justify violence, not because they are evil, but because their faith tells them it's good. History proves this, from the Crusades to modern jihadist movements.
Professor Robert Pape of the University of Chicago studied every known case of suicide terrorism, 315 cases, and he came to the conclusion that there's, quote, little connection between suicide terrorism and Islamic fundamentalism or any of the world's religions. The taproot of suicide terrorism, he says, is nationalism. It's about land, it's about power, it's about politics. It's not about faith. Faith is just a cover. What do you know that he doesn't know?
Well, I've seen other evidence. There are different people say different things. I've seen plenty of testimonies of suicide bombers who have said precisely that they do it because they want a martyr's paradise.
Do you include the 7/7 bombers in that case as well?
Yes, I believe so.
Have you watched their suicide videos?
I'm not sure that I have, no.
They talk about Afghanistan, they talk about Iraq, they talk about crusades, they talk about war between the West and the Muslim world, they talk about invading armies. I mean, there's a lot of real world stuff in there. I'm not saying, of course not, that faith doesn't play a role, but I'm just interested in this idea that you think faith is the issue. You said in a very famous column you wrote 4 days after 9/11 that this came from religion.
There are enormously good reasons for people to take political action, and this we see in Northern Ireland, we see it in Afghanistan, we see it in Sri Lanka, where the Tamil Tigers operated. So yes, there are political reasons, but the promise of a martyr's heaven, which is, you cannot deny that this is part of Islamic doctrine. Martyrs go straight to paradise.
Yes, but not terrorists, not murderers, not criminals.
Well, they believe that because they're told it by their imams.
But then what about the majority of the world's Muslim clerics and ulama who came out and condemned 9/11 straight afterwards?
Well, I'm delighted they did, but they were pretty quiet about it.
What about the argument that says human beings are prone to violence, they're prone to carrying out crimes against their fellow man? You can blame religion, you can blame politics, you can blame economics, lots of factors, lots of excuses. What I don't get is, why do you only focus on religion? For fairness, why don't you also isolate the other factors?
There are lots of other factors, and I'm quite happy to say that, yes. There are lots of, I mean, if you look at the wars of history, some of them have been about religion, plenty of them have not been about religion. I never said religion is the sole cause of wars and violence.
You may not have said that, but you would accept that the new atheists, people like Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, have blamed a lot of history's wars on God and religion, and you make a similar suggestion in The God Delusion.
Yeah, I would blame a lot of history's wars, but the most terrible wars in history, the two major wars of the 20th century, are nothing to do with religion.
You accept that point?
Yeah, of course.
And the Cold War and Vietnam?
Yes, I would, of course, yes.
So when you have a situation where some of the world's worst crimes were carried out not by believers, how then does that square with your idea that it's religion that causes good people to do bad things, it's religion that's driving violence, your original statement against religion at the start of this?
Dogmatic belief in something like religion or something like Marxism or something like Nazism, these are all, or indeed patriotism, I mean, my country right or wrong, these are all pernicious beliefs which can drive people to do terrible things. And in the Second World War, Hitlerism was driven by racism, by a sort of sub-Wagnerian pagan religion which Hitler revived. Stalin's atrocities were motivated by a dogmatic belief in Marxism.
And atheism.
Stalin happened to be an atheist, but he was never motivated specifically.
The Soviet Union was not based on scientific rationalism, on the elimination of religion and God?
Stalin persecuted the church. Stalin persecuted just about everybody.
Are you saying that the Soviet Union, the leaders of the Soviet Union, were not driven by a hatred of religion and a belief that science and human progress and materialism was the way forward?
They believed that materialism, science, human progress, those are kind of there was a Marxist slant on those words, and they were hideously misused.
Mao Zedong, when he invaded Tibet, told the Dalai Lama that religion is poison. The subtext to the late Christopher Hitchens' book was religion poisons everything. Can you blame people of religion for saying, hold on, we've heard these ideas before, that religion poisons everything and it leads in one direction?
It's an incidental fact that Mao Zedong and Stalin happened to be atheists. They
incidental,
were not,
it wasn't core to communism.
I think it was not core to communism, no.
So when Karl Marx was talking about religion being the opiate of the masses, that was just a throwaway line?
Yeah, I mean, that was an out of context statement. I mean, what on earth do you think that's got to do with atheism? I don't know.
Let me put a statement in context to you. Albania, one of the world's worst dictatorships, tyrannies that we've seen in the last 100 years. Article 37 of Albania's communist constitution declared, quote, "The state recognizes no religion and supports atheistic propaganda in order to implant a scientific, materialistic world outlook in people."
What do you think you're saying? I mean, that's an appalling thing to say. Of course it is.
Why is that an appalling thing to say? What do you disagree with in that statement?
Why would I want to support atheistic propaganda? I support science and truth.
But you don't support spreading atheism.
I support spreading science and truth. If that happens to be atheism, I support it. I'm not going to start bullying people into being atheist. I'm not going to start trying to compel people to be atheists. That was what the Albanians were doing. It's nothing to do with what I want to do.
Of course, but you'd like to persuade them not to be believers and become atheists.
I'd like to raise consciousness in a gentle, civilized way, using argument, rational argument, from...
Robert Pape's study is often cited to say suicide terrorism is just about politics and land. But that's incomplete. While political grievances play a role, faith supercharges the act by promising eternal rewards. For example, the 9/11 hijackers left martyrdom letters quoting Quranic verses like Surah 9:111, which promises paradise for those who die fighting for God. Politics may light the fire, but religion pours gasoline on it by turning death into a gateway to eternal bliss. And when critics point to Stalin or Mao as proof that atheism is just as violent, they miss the distinction Dawkins makes. These dictators weren't acting on scientific rationalism. They were acting on dogmatic ideologies. Stalin didn't commit atrocities because he lacked belief in God. He did it because of an unquestioned political faith in Marxism. That's the same mechanism that religion uses, blind loyalty to an absolute authority. the Crusades, the Inquisition, ISIS, all justified mass violence not with politics alone, but with sacred texts that declared killing was righteous. And when regimes like Stalin's persecuted religion, they weren't advancing reason. They were simply replacing one dogma with another.
Evidence.
In your book, you cite lots of evidence for the bad things religion's done. What I wonder is, if you were being fair, wouldn't you have also included some of the good things that religion's done?
My passion is for scientific truth. I don't much care about what's good and evil, actually. I care about what's true. Do you actually believe in your Muslim faith? Do you believe that Muhammad split the moon in two? Do you believe that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, for example? I pay you the compliment of assuming that you don't.
No, I do. I believe in miracles.
You believe that?
Yes.
You believe that Muhammad went to heaven on a winged horse?
Yes, I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I believe in revelation. I mean, the point here is that let's assume I'm wrong, Richard. I'm wrong.
Let's
assume I'm wrong. I'm wrong. I'm happy to concede that, Richard. I'm happy to concede it. I'm wrong. All religions are wrong. God does not exist. We're all mad. The issue is we exist. We've existed for a while. I think even Christopher Hitchens said, and you've said in your writings, we're not going anywhere. So my question to you is, why not acknowledge, for example, the good things that religion has done? Do you accept that religion has done good things, despite all of our mad beliefs and our miracles?
I accept that individual religious people have done an enormous number of good things.
Not driven by religion?
Well, who knows?
You're very mean-spirited. You won't give any credit at all.
Take somebody like Martin Luther King, for example.
Reverend Martin Luther King.
Yes. Obviously, he was a cleric. I imagine that fed into the good things that he did. Plenty of other things did. He was a great admirer of Gandhi, and he was a great admirer of non-violence. He was a brilliant and wonderful great man.
Would you disconnect MLK's non-violence and Gandhi's non-violence from their very strongly held religious beliefs? They didn't.
Well, I think it's not a thing that I really care about, actually. I think they were...
You do care about it, Richard. You're saying that people carry out violence in the name of God, and I cite you an example of very famous people who have done good and non-violence in the name of God, and you say, I'm not interested.
If God doesn't exist, then doing something good in his name it's great that something good gets done, but there's no evidence at all that believing in God makes you more likely to do good things. I can't see any noble, logical connection between being religious and doing good things.
Let's concede that God does not exist. Let's concede that religion is false. My problem here is trying to understand why some of the new atheists are so anti-religion when religious people clearly are doing lots of good things and they're doing it in the name of God.
I've never denied that religious people are doing good things and non-religious people are doing good things. I care about what's true. I'm an educator, I'm a scientist, and I want people to understand the truth about the universe in which they live. That's what I care about. And I regard religion as a distraction, and in some cases a pernicious distraction from true education, which I love and value the way you value and love your God.
Can you not do both?
Well, so long as they don't contradict each other.
Richard.
As long as they don't contradict each other. But if you actually believe Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse, that's an anti-scientific belief.
And that could be wrong.
But that bloody well is wrong.
But that doesn't change. That doesn't change. How do you know it's wrong?
Oh, come on. You're a man of the 21st century.
No, I'm just asking. It comes back to my original question. The rational position is the agnostic. The rational position is the agnostic position.
Why up there?
The rational position. I didn't say up there. I didn't pick a place.
Okay,
you
well,
picked a place.
why would a winged horse be the way to get to heaven if it's not up there?
I asked a question about. You asked about proof. I'm all for saying I can't prove it, but can you prove he didn't do it? I mean, this is the end-old debate.
Didn't fly to heaven on a winged horse?
I'm just asking on your criteria. I'm just asking on your criteria.
No, I can't prove it, and I can't prove it wasn't a golden unicorn.
But I'm fascinated that you're rather talk about what animals the Prophet may or may not have used 1400 years ago, rather than talk about what Muslims or Islam is doing in the world today, good or bad. Well, that seems to be the distraction. If anyone's distracted, it seems to be you.
Well, that's your view. I'm fascinated by how somebody, a respected, sophisticated journalist in the 21st century, can believe that a prophet flew to heaven on a winged horse.
Let me ask you this. Are all people who hold beliefs in God and in miracles and the supernatural, do you regard them all as intellectually inferior to you?
I regard those beliefs as intellectual nonsense. I don't regard the individuals as intellectually inferior to me, because many of them palpably are not. If you go back in history, then all bets are off, because before Darwin, for example, it is not at all surprising that before Darwin people believed in all kinds of things which they wouldn't believe in now. There are many people, many scientists today who say they're religious. And if you actually ask them what they believe, in many cases it turns out what they believe is in some sort of deistic God, some sort of intellectual spirit, some sort of creative intelligence that lay at the root of the universe, perhaps invented the laws of physics, something like that.
I don't agree with this book, but it's an excellent book, very well argued. You're very passionate, clearly. There's one section in the book where you talk about bringing up children.
Oh, yes.
And you talked about education. You talk about a story when you tell a story about being in Ireland and talking about the Catholic child abuse scandal. And there's one quote on page 356, which I will read out to you. Horrible as sexual abuse no doubt was, the damage was arguably less than the long-term psychological damage inflicted by bringing the child up Catholic in the first place. You believe that being brought up as a Catholic is worse than being abused by a priest?
There are shades of being abused by a priest, and I quoted the example of a woman in America who wrote to me saying that when she was 7 years old, she was sexually abused by a priest in his car, and at the same time, a friend of hers, who also 7, who was Protestant, or was of Protestant family, I should say, died. And she was told that because her friend was Protestant, she had gone to hell and would be roasting in hell forever. And she told me that of those 2 abuses, she got over the physical abuse. It was yucky, but she got over it. But the mental abuse of being told about hell, she took years to get over. And
with respect, Richard, you're an empiricist, you're a rationalist. One letter from one woman in America isn't really the basis to extrapolate and make such a sweeping conclusion.
That is, of course, true. And I'm not basing it on that. It seems to me that telling children such that they really, really believe that people who sin are going to go to hell and roast forever, that your skin grows again when it peels off with burning. It seems to me to be intuitively entirely reasonable that that is a worse form of child abuse, that will give more nightmares, that will give more genuine distress, because they really believe it. If they don't believe it, it's not a problem, of course.
You also say...
Let me just... I mean, I've been put on the spot about this hellfire thing.
We haven't really been put on the spot. In what sense have you been put on the spot?
Well, I sense that you think it's somehow obvious that having a priest, if you're a small girl, having a priest put his hand... I would
be very interested in asking the audience whether being told about heaven and hell as a child, being brought up as Catholic, is worse than being abused by a priest.
Okay.
Let's have a show of hands. Okay. Is it worse to be abused by a priest? And if you believe it's worse for a priest to abuse a child than to bring up your child Catholic, raise your hands. Are they both as bad as each other? Raise your hands. So we have a 3-way split in the audience.
Dawkins isn't denying that religious people can do good. He's saying belief in supernatural claims, like Muhammad flying on a winged horse, doesn't make someone more moral. Martin Luther King, for example, was inspired by Christianity, but also by secular thinkers like Gandhi. Their message of justice didn't require belief in miracles. It required moral reasoning, which anyone can access regardless of faith. The bigger point is truth matters. And Dawkins sees religion as a distraction from truth. That's why he focuses less on whether religion feels good and more on whether it's true. Then there's his most controversial claim, that teaching children about hell can be worse than sexual abuse. He backs this with real examples in psychology. One woman told Dawkins she was molested as a child by a priest, but was more traumatized by being told her Protestant friend was burning in hell. That sounds extreme, but research supports it. Childhood religious trauma can cause anxiety, depression, and even PTSD symptoms well into adulthood. Clinical psychologists like Marlene Winnell call this religious trauma syndrome. Studies on adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, also show long-term fear and shame can damage mental health just as much as physical abuse. Dawkins isn't minimizing abuse. He's exposing how deep the psychological damage from fear-based indoctrination can run. Teaching kids to believe their loved ones are tortured forever isn't just wrong, it's abusive. And defending it because it's religion doesn't make it better. In short, good deeds don't prove religion is true, and false beliefs, especially ones rooted in fear, can do real harm. That's why Dawkins pushes back.
Defender of science. But what would you say to those people who say there are some quite important questions, genuine questions, that science cannot answer? Why are we here? What's the meaning of life? Where does morality come from? And that if religion wants to have a crack at answering those, what's science's objection?
I'm not sure I'd accept that science can't answer those particular questions. I think there are other questions science probably shouldn't try to answer, like what is right and what is wrong. Those are questions that are not the immediate concern of science. But what's the meaning of life? Why is there anything? How did it all start? Those seem to me to be scientific questions, or potentially scientific questions. If there are some questions of that sort that science can never answer, then we should at least keep trying to answer them. And if science can't answer them, religion having a crack at answering them, if there's no reason to think that religion has any basis for an answer, then why would religion have a crack? Why would you bother to listen to religion having a crack at answering them? I mean, one thing I would say is there may be questions that science can't answer, like the origin of everything. But if science can't answer them, then religion certainly can't, and nothing else can either.
Why? Why is it it's either science or nothing?
Well, yes, because science is the method of getting at what's true. I mean, if you take something like how did the universe begin, which is a very baffling, deep question. How did life begin? Another baffling, deep question. Both those questions are unanswered. The best methods we have of approaching those are the methods of science, because these are the methods that look at evidence, that evaluate evidence in all sorts of sophisticated ways. What has religion got to do with that, other than just looking at the writings of somebody who wrote a few centuries ago? I mean, why would you bother to read those writings?
So the great philosophers and theologians in history who have grappled with these big questions and thought about spiritual issues, moral issues, the transcendent, they're all wasting their time?
Yes, they're wasting their time.
What about, why does my life have meaning? What's its worth?
Well,
where does my dignity come from?
Your meaning and your dignity are up to you, and mine are up to me, and these are not questions that science would attempt to answer. Each person finds their own meaning in their own life. And good luck to them.
And what's wrong with religion offering moral certainties if, as you say, science can't answer moral questions?
Science can't offer moral certainty, but I don't see that religion can either.
You don't think that the religious values we have today, the moral codes we live by today, were originally derived from Judeo-Christian values, Islamic values, Hindu values?
Not really, no. I mean, things like the Golden Rule, things like treat others as you would wish to be treated yourself. These are ancient values which crop up all over the world. They've been adopted by many religions. You can find justifications for them in moral philosophy. You can find justifications for them in evolutionary biology, which is my own subject. I don't seriously think you're going to base your morality on religion, because if you do, then you've got to say, well, do I base it on Scripture? I hope you don't base it on Scripture, because if you do, then you're going to have some pretty horrible values unless you deliberately cut out those parts of Scripture which are unacceptable to modern morality.
When asked about the big questions, why we're here, the meaning of life, or the origin of morality, Dawkins pushes back on the idea that only religion can answer them. He argues that questions like, how did the universe begin, or how did life start, are scientific questions. They may not be solved yet, but the best way to approach them is through evidence and reason, not by having a crack with ancient scriptures. If science can't answer a question, religion certainly can't, because it doesn't use methods that reliably uncover truth. On morality, Dawkins admits science doesn't hand us moral certainty, but he rejects the idea that morality comes from religion. He points to the golden rule: treat others as you'd want to be treated, which appears in cultures worldwide, independent of faith. Evolutionary biology also helps explain empathy and cooperation as survival traits. Religion may adopt these values, but it doesn't invent them. And here's where he makes a sharp point. If you really based morality on Scripture, you'd have to accept the cruel and regressive parts of those texts too, unless you deliberately ignore them. That shows morality evolves with human reasoning, not because of divine command. For Dawkins, meaning and dignity don't come from religion or science. They come from each individual. Each of us must create our own purpose, and that's enough. So here's the big question for you. Do you think morality needs religion, or can human reason and shared values guide us just as well, maybe even better? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like if this got you thinking, and don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into debates that shape how we see truth, morality, and meaning.